My name is Vivian. I'm 35 years old and I'm a structural engineer in San Francisco. I spent my whole life believing that if I just worked hard, lived decently, never asked for much, never caused trouble, then someday I would finally be acknowledged, finally be loved in a fair way. But that night shattered every last illusion I had. On my 35th birthday, the whole extended family gathered in a living room lit up like a stage. My mother smiled warmly, my father raised his glass in a toast, and together they pulled down the red curtain behind them. A chorus of, "Oh," filled the air. Behind the curtain stood a luxury apartment in downtown, the birthday gift they gave my younger brother Brian, a man who had never managed to keep a job longer than 3 months. Applause erupted. My mother dabbed at her eyes with emotion. When it was my turn to open the box placed in front of me, inside was a single card. Just one short line. "You're strong enough to take care of yourself." The room fell into a chilling silence. I stood frozen, clutching that card, while cheers for my brother's gift still rang in my ears like mockery. Have you ever felt as though your whole family was just waiting for you to disappear so life would be easier for them? If you've ever been the one forgotten at your own celebration, leave a comment below and share your story. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. Because right after that night, I did something my family never saw coming. I stood motionless in that room, drowned in lights and laughter that suddenly felt foreign. Every sound seemed to collapse into the void opening inside me, a void no gift or compliment could fill. I stared at the hastily written words, my fingers gripping the edge of the card until my knuckles turned white. "You're strong enough to take care of yourself." I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, forcing a faint smile the way I had for years whenever someone brushed aside my efforts with a thoughtless remark. But this time was different. No one even bothered to hide it anymore. No one disguised the favoritism under neutral advice or so-called fair guidance. They had just handed my brother an apartment worth over $500,000, the same brother who sponged off them, dodged responsibility, never lasted in a single job. And me, the daughter who paid her own tuition, bought her own car, fixed up her own home, who had never asked them once for financial help. I got a card with a short message, as if it were some prize. I walked out of the living room in silence. No one called after me, no worried glance, no question. In the hallway, music still floated from behind me. I heard my mother's whisper, "She's too sensitive. Hasn't she managed just fine all these years?" I froze. Didn't turn back. I went straight upstairs to my old room, the one they still called Vivian's room, though for years it had been storage for old clothes and winter coats. My graduation photo still lay face down on a dusty shelf, while Brian's photos hung everywhere from the hallway to the kitchen. I walked to the corner, pulled out my old suitcase. I didn't need much. Just enough clothes, my laptop, some personal items, the suspension bridge design I'd been working on. I looked around, nothing else I wanted to bring. Not because I had everything, but because I didn't want to take a single thing from that house with me. Before heading to the kitchen, I passed through the living room again. Everyone was still laughing. Brian was showing photos of the new apartment's interior on his phone, talking about decorating it modern classical. I had no idea where he'd picked up those words, but I knew for certain it was the same apartment my mother had been eyeing for months, calling it a investment. I walked into the kitchen, opened the drawer by the coffee maker, where I once kept the spare house keys I had made for Brian after he locked himself out drunk one night. I placed the keys on the counter, slipped my own off my keyring, and set it beside them. No one saw, no one noticed. On the bar counter sat a glass of untouched champagne. I picked it up, not to drink, but to look at my reflection in the golden liquid. I didn't look like a failure, but I didn't look loved either. "I'm leaving early," I said softly. a final courtesy to the house that was no longer my home. No one answered. I stepped out just before midnight. The December air cut through me, wind whipping my hair and the thin birthday dress I had chosen, thinking it was supposed to be a special day. My Toyota waited quietly by the curb. The same car I had bought on installments nearly 8 years ago, the car I had repaired and maintained myself, the car that carried me to work every day since I was a trainee engineer. No one gave it to me. No red bow, no applause. But it had never failed me. I started the engine. The familiar hum was the only answer I needed. I had no plan, only the certainty that I had to leave the city that night. I opened the map app, typed in Melissa's address, my best friend from college, in San Diego. Her last message still sat in my phone. If anything happens, come here. I'll always have a room for you. I pressed call. It rang twice before she picked up, her voice still groggy with sleep. Viv, is something wrong? I didn't answer right away. My breath was still ragged with cold and anger. I'm driving, heading your way. A short silence. Do you need me to send you gas money? I let out a faint laugh, not from humor, but from the shock of someone actually thinking of that. Number, just keep that room ready. There's already a fresh pillow and scented candles, Grandma. I hung up. That fleeting smile was the first real breath I'd taken since reading that empty card. On Interstate 5, the streetlights stretched like a golden thread leading me through the night. The scenery blurred past the window. Past midnight, no calls, no texts, nothing pulling me back. I wasn't going to message anyone. At home, I didn't need them to understand, not now. The farther I drove, the lighter my chest felt. As if something that had sat heavy for decades was peeling away layer by layer. Ahead, lights blurred in the fog. I rolled down the window, let the wind hit my face. I wasn't the strong child meant to prop everyone else up. I wasn't born to play the role of the independent big sister forever. I was just a woman walking away from a party she'd never truly been invited to. The dashboard clock flipped to 2:47 a.m. when I pulled off onto a small rest stop along the highway. The southern Oregon night air seeped through the cracked windows. I parked near a darkened gas station, the only glow coming from a vending machine reflecting on the damp asphalt. I killed the engine, reclined the seat slightly, not to sleep but to breathe. My chest still felt like an aftershock from an earthquake whose epicenter was inside me. The faint glow on the windshield made me remember the first birthday cake I bought for myself at 12. That day, school let out early. My mother said she'd be home in time to pick me up, but called to say she was busy preparing Brian's 7th birthday party. You can walk home, right? I'm making a superhero cake with a smoke machine. I stood by the roadside, phone pressed to my ear, still trying to smile. When I got home, I slipped past the backyard where the event staff were setting up backdrops and speakers. Brian ran around in a bright red cape. Everyone said how adorable he was. While my mother and Brian's friends laughed with the clown and balloons, I took a few crumpled bills from my wallet money I'd saved from babysitting him every night and walked to the nearby grocery store. I picked smallest cake, simple white frosting with 3 buttercream flowers. The clerk asked if I wanted a name written on top. I hesitated, then shook my head. I cut that cake alone in my room, hallway lights spilling in just enough to reveal a corner of the wall. A truck horn in the distance yanked me back to the present. I opened my eyes, rolled down the window further. Cold air stung my skin, but cleared my mind. I turned on the seat warmer, my hands still trembling on the wheel. Maybe not just from the cold. I once thought I remembered wrong, that a child's mind might exaggerate. But the older I got, the more certain I became it wasn't my imagination. In high school, I studied relentlessly, joined every extracurricular hoping for a full scholarship. My mother would say, "Sweetheart, keep pushing, okay? Your dad and I are busy covering Brian's music lessons, you understand." They never scolded, never shouted. But the neglect seeped in quietly through every small priority that excluded me. In college, I chose engineering. The scholarship covered only part. I worked shifts at the library, then at a bakery 6 blocks from my dorm. Every paycheck I divided carefully: tuition, books, and a tiny slice for what I called luxuries, a hot Friday dinner or a used novel from the discount bin. Brian, meanwhile, after failing his second year of design school, was fully funded for a gap year in Europe to find inspiration. I still remember the video call from Paris. He sat in a cafe with the Eiffel Tower behind him, sipping a pink smoothie through a straw. "Mom says you're still working? That's crazy. Why not just ask for money? She just sent me another 10 grand for a photography class." I remember that I laughed. But inside, the cold from my 12th birthday seemed to return, seeping into every space between my heart and my ribs. I never asked for anything. Every time I needed something, I told myself, "It's fine, I'll figure it out." And I always did. That was the problem. When a child always figures things out alone, the parents start to believe that child doesn't need anything at all. I still remember vividly the day I received my engineering degree. I sent emails inviting my whole family to the graduation ceremony. Brian was in Florence learning how to make artisan coffee. My parents didn't come. "Plane tickets are too expensive, honey," my mom texted. "Your dad is redoing the roof." That roof was being renovated into a photo studio for Brian when he came back. I sat in the hall among hundreds of other students, the collar of my gown still showing the stitch I'd sewn myself the night before. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I paused, searching for a familiar face in the crowd. There was no one. The camera caught the moment I looked up, eyes wide, with a lopsided smile that was more forced than proud. That photo I never hung on the wall. But I've kept it. A knock on the window startled me. A night shift janitor was signaling, asking if I was okay. I nodded slightly, motioned that I'd leave soon. I turned back, started the engine. The stream of memories broke, but the mark they left still smoldered. A birthday cake with no name, a diploma with no one to congratulate me. The only gift, a hollow card with the words, "You're strong enough." Sometimes I wonder if I had been weaker, more dependent, cried more, would I have been loved the way Brian was? But then I realized it wasn't because I was strong that they overlooked me. They overlooked me, and that's why I was forced to be strong. The car kept rolling south. I wasn't sure if I was running away or moving towards something. I only knew that every mile carried me further from that living room full of applause, where I had stood in the middle of my own party yet felt like a stranger. I hit the call button for Melissa right after leaving the rest stop. The screen showed connecting for a long while before she picked up, her sleepy voice echoing through the car's Bluetooth. "Viv, what's going on? Are you okay?" I hesitated, staring past the steering wheel into the thick black road ahead. "I'm driving down to you. I might need a place to stay for a while." There was no surprise on the other end. Just a short pause, then Melissa exhaled softly. "My place has a spare room, you know that. Do you have enough warm clothes with you? Night driving can be dangerous." Her voice carried that familiar gentleness, like those late nights back in our dorm when I stayed up sketching drafts until 3 a.m. And Melissa always had coffee ready and kept the room quiet so I could focus. She never asked unnecessary questions. She never demanded I explain when I wasn't ready. "I'll text you my location. Drive carefully. If you get tired, stop to rest, okay? Don't push it." I nodded, even though she couldn't see. Hanging up, I felt as if a soft but steady thread had just caught me, keeping me from slipping into some bottomless void ahead. I pressed the gas, merging back onto the main lane. The sky was still dark, thick fog hanging like a heavy veil across my vision. The Southern Oregon highway was slick with cold, and my headlights lit only a short stretch ahead. I was going about 60 miles an hour when I heard a faint screech. Something wasn't right. I slowed, checked the dashboard. Nothing obvious, but I felt the left wheel rubbing against something. Maybe the fender lining, maybe the brakes worn to the edge. I had no choice but to keep going. At 4 a.m. on the highway, no repair shop was open. I turned on the radio, not to listen, but just to have a human voice in the car. Static filled the speakers between frequencies. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from something more familiar: loneliness. A rest stop appeared up ahead to the right. I pulled in, deciding to check the wheel, catch my breath, and see if I needed roadside assistance. I stepped out, the wind slapping my face. Headlights glared against the damp pavement. I bent down to the front wheel. Just as I suspected, the plastic fender liner had come loose and was scraping the tire whenever the car moved. I opened the trunk, found the roll of heavy-duty tape I always kept for securing wires at job sites. Kneeling under the headlights, I wrapped the loose plastic back in place, my hands trembling from the cold and from an anger I couldn't quite place. If I told my dad about this, he'd ask, "Didn't you take the car in for maintenance?" If I told my mom, she'd frown. An engineer letting her car break down on the road? No one would ask why I was alone in the middle of the night, driving hundreds of miles, not knowing where I'd end up. After taping it back, I stood, brushing the grit off my knees. Just then, an SUV sped past, spraying water from the road. I dodged instinctively, but cold droplets still splashed across my calves and collar. Not soaked, but icy. I climbed back inside, turned on the heater, waited until my body warmed before driving again. As the car rolled back onto the highway, I let out a tired laugh. My beat-up car, long past retirement age, was still carrying me away from Portland. Just like me, it had never been polished, never celebrated, but it had never abandoned me either. The road from Oregon into California was long and monotonous, dotted with repeating signs, sparse eucalyptus trees, and the pale glow of dawn. I passed the "Welcome to California" sign at 6:08 a.m., just as the sun pushed its first rays through the fog. Pale gold light spilled across the windshield, glinting off the steering wheel and my clenched hands. Around 8 o'clock, I stopped at a small diner near Bakersfield. It was nearly empty, only a waitress wiping down the bar, country music playing softly from a speaker in the corner. I sat by the window, ordered black coffee and toast. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with streaks of gray in her hair, looked at me with a gaze that was half concern, half sympathy. "Long night?" she asked, setting down the mug. "Pretty much," I replied. She nodded, said nothing more. But before turning away, she placed a hand lightly on my shoulder, gentle as a breeze. "If you're running away from something, I hope you're running towards something better." I just smiled instead of answering. She didn't know me, didn't need to. But her words felt as though they had been pulled straight from my chest, as if she had read the thoughts I'd been carrying unspoken the whole drive. I ate in silence, eyes drifting to the barren hills in the distance. My phone buzzed softly in my jacket pocket. A message from Melissa: "Call when you're close. I'm baking orange cinnamon muffins." The memory of that smell rushed back a winter morning in college, when I'd gone 3 nights without sleep for a design project. Melissa had set a warm muffin on my desk without a word. She had always been the kind of person who didn't need to ask, but always showed up at the right moment. I stared at my phone, typed a few words, then deleted them. Finally, I sent just one line: "I'm on my way. Almost there." I left the diner in full daylight. Golden sunlight stretched across the road like a wide ribbon. For the first time, I felt I wasn't just leaving the past behind, I was moving toward a place where I could breathe. Not for anyone else, not for any role imposed on me, just because I needed to be myself, even if it was only in a small kitchen, next to an old friend baking muffins with no conditions attached to my existence. When I arrived, Melissa's apartment was already filled with the smell of butter and cinnamon. She stood in the kitchen, oven mitt still on her hand, brown hair hastily tied back, apron dusted with flour. Her eyes on me held no questions, no judgment, just the warm presence of someone who understood how heavy silence could be. "Your room's ready. Lavender candles, thick blankets," Melissa said, setting the tray of muffins on the counter. "Want something to eat? Or maybe sleep first?" I stepped inside, my legs feeling as though they'd just set down an invisible weight I'd carried since leaving Portland. "I'll take a shower first. Smell like car and highway dust. Fresh towels in the bathroom. Water pressure's good." She smiled, turned back without another word. No curiosity, no pressure. After showering, I sat on the bed by the window. Late sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting the clay-colored wall in warm tones. No arguing voices downstairs, no slamming doors, no chairs scraping. Just steady quiet, the kind that didn't feel lonely. That afternoon, as we sat drinking tea in the kitchen, I spoke first. "I'm applying to transfer to the San Diego office." Melissa paused mid-sip, then looked up. "So you're not going back?" I nodded. No warning, no goodbye, just left the keys on the table. She said nothing for a moment, then sighed. "Sounds like you finally picked the right time to start over." The next morning, I emailed the Portland office director. I didn't write much. Just requested a transfer to San Diego, expressing my commitment to continue contributing as a senior engineer. I attached my recent 3-year project record, a brief introduction, and stated I was ready to start whenever needed. I hit send at 9:12 a.m. By 1:45 p.m., I received a response from HR. "Your office transfer request has been approved. We will support you through the transition. Start date, next Monday." I sat still for a long time after reading the email. What I felt wasn't excitement, and it wasn't surprise either. It was a soft wave of calm spreading through my chest. No one had to make calls for me, no one had to send private notes, no one had to vouch for me. I was accepted because of the portfolio I submitted, because of the work I had done. And this time, I didn't need anyone's recognition to know it mattered. "Come out with me tonight?" Melissa asked while wiping her hands on her apron. "There's a trial pottery class at the community center nearby. A friend of mine is teaching." I let out a quiet laugh. "You think I'm cut out for shaping clay?" "No one needs to be. All you need are 2 hands and a little patience. You've got plenty of both." We arrived at the community center close to 6 p.m. It was an old but well-kept building, walls painted cream white, the entrance covered with a plain gray carpet. The class took place in a wide room filled with wooden tables, trays of clay, and shelves stacked with pieces left out to dry. No one wore fancy clothes. No one cared where anyone came from. The instructor, an older woman with gray hair tied back neatly, wore a simple cotton shirt, her hands cracked from years of dried clay. She moved from person to person, showing how to shape a cup, how to feel the clay's movement through your hands. "Don't force the clay to do what you want," she said as she stood behind me. "Listen to what it wants to become." I stared at the lump of clay in my hands, sensing every small shift as though it understood me. Each turn of the wheel felt like it pulled a layer of memory out of me. I didn't make anything beautiful, but when I placed the uneven piece on the tray, I felt a little lighter. After class, a middle-aged man carrying a rough clay form passed me. "Did you make something?" he asked. Not mocking, just a kind gesture. I made a lopsided bowl. "Then you're already ahead of me," he winked, smiling with a dimple. "Took me 3 months to make something that even resembled a cup." Melissa pulled me toward a small group gathered in the corner drinking herbal tea. About 8 people. They laughed while sharing stories about cracked vases or plates that turned out looking like hats. No one asked who I was. No one cared why I came. They just handed me a cup and made space. The next week I came back, then the week after. Gradually, I grew used to the smell of wet earth, the feel of powder sticking in the creases of my hands, the quiet hum of the spinning wheel. Melissa also introduced me to a small therapy group that met every Wednesday, just 8 people. We gathered in the basement of a small church, where the faint smell of coffee and warm yellow light made everything easier to bear. The group leader, Adam, was around 60, once worked in insurance. His eyes were steady, his voice slow. Each week he asked only one question and then let everyone share freely. By the third week he asked, "When did you first feel like you didn't belong in your own family?" I stayed silent for a long time. A woman named Carla, about 50, spoke first. She told how her parents always called her sister's name when she brought home good grades, as if only that name deserved success. A man named Ben said his father had written a will, leaving everything to his younger brother because he needs more help. I sat there, listening to every word, every breath. Every coffee cup clinked against the table. Finally, I spoke. There was a card in my birthday gift box. Nothing inside except the words, "You're strong enough to take care of yourself." Carla looked at me for a long moment, then said softly, "Blood makes you related. Respect makes you family." I can't remember who said it first. Maybe it was Adam. Maybe it was Carla. But those words replayed in my mind from that day forward like a quiet reminder. I didn't need to demand the right to be loved. I just needed to start living a life where I didn't have to ask permission to feel at peace. Now I was sitting in my new office, light streaming through the large window behind me, stretching across my desk and reflecting faintly on my laptop screen. The company in San Diego was much smaller than the Portland headquarters, but the atmosphere here was different. No one cared who I had been before I arrived. They cared only about what I could do once I sat down at the desk. I had just finished the preliminary design for a pedestrian bridge in a southern coastal county when my phone buzzed. My father's number appeared. I stared at the screen for a long time, then muted it and set it face down. Less than a minute later, it buzzed again. My mother. Then Brian. Then my father again. Text messages started flooding in, interrupting my work notifications. I opened one. The words appeared instantly, short and sharp. "Your mother is in the hospital from stress, all because of you." I stared at the phrase "because of you," feeling heat rising behind my eyes. I wondered if anyone else had ever been told their mother was in the hospital without it being wrapped in blame, without it being weaponized as a guilty verdict. Melissa sent me a screenshot. It was Brian's public post. The caption on Facebook read in mournful tones, "When a sister chooses to abandon her family for money, we're the ones left with the consequences." This apartment was supposed to be a hope for healing, but it's been twisted into a symbol of betrayal. Below it was a photo of Brian standing in front of the building my parents had bought for him, hands in his pockets, face tilted like he was deep in thought. A comment right underneath, from one of my mother's relatives, "Vivian has always been cold. At least Brian is still here to take care of his parents." I set the phone down, closed my eyes for a moment, then turned back to the design on my screen. The main beam of the bridge needed load distribution at both ends. I zoomed in on the joint between the foundation and the roadway. Everything was still there, waiting. Every calculation still needed checking. Every component still had to stand strong against earthquakes and storms. The bridge didn't care if I was a good daughter. It only needed me to do my job. At lunch, I carried my meal to the outdoor area behind the office. A few coworkers were sitting at a long table beneath a banyan tree. Lucy, the electrical engineer in my department, tilted her head when she saw me. "You're Vivian Collins, right?" she asked gently. I nodded. "Your family stuff is spreading on Facebook. No one here cares. I mean, no one's judging you. Everyone has their own story." I sat down, opened my lunchbox. White rice, grilled fish, stir-fried vegetables. I'd cooked it the night before when I had some extra time after pottery class. The fish still smelled good, even cold. Thanks, I said evenly. I can't control what they say, but I can control how I respond. Lucy nodded, took a bite of her sandwich, and said nothing more. That afternoon, as I was reviewing the foundation design for the new project, the executive assistant knocked lightly on my door. Miss Collins, a courier delivered something for you. I took the pale brown envelope from her hands. The return address was my parents' house, my father's familiar handwriting across the front. I tore it open. Inside was a copy of my mother's medical report, high stress level, sleep disorder requiring rest and treatment. Attached behind it was the hospital bill, unpaid. I didn't need to read further to know exactly what they wanted. I slid the envelope into my drawer and locked it. I wasn't going to let a bill become a shackle dragging me back into an old role. I wasn't a bank. I wasn't a nurse. And I wasn't a puppet in their one-sided system anymore. That evening, I went to therapy as usual. Our group sat in a circle in the basement room of the old church, yellow light spilling across the uneven ceiling. Adam looked around, his voice warm and low. Who wants to share today? I lifted my head, still holding the paper cup of ginger tea. I got my mother's medical report. They sent the bill too. And not a word of care. Just the conclusion. Because of you, she was admitted. Carla, the woman who usually sat across from me, tilted her head. They're using health as a tool for control again. I nodded. And Brian posted about me, painting me as the one who destroyed the family. How do you feel about that? Adam asked. I was quiet for a few seconds. Honestly, I feel sad, but not guilty. I think that's the biggest difference. Before, every time they called, I felt like I was the cause of everything. Now, I just see that I'm refusing to keep playing a role I no longer want. Ben, the salt and pepper-haired man, slowly set his cup down on the floor. You're not a doctor, and a real mother doesn't use illness to claw back control. I looked from Ben to Carla. Every face in that room carried a story once twisted by the people they had called family. But here, no one shouted that I was wrong. No one demanded I return. No one used tears as evidence against me. I left the session with a lighter mind. Not because I had forgiven my parents, or because I felt comfortable with what was happening, but because I realized that peace doesn't need anyone's permission. On the drive home, I turned on the radio. An old Debussy symphony filled the car, each rise and fall stretched like breath. I eased my foot off the gas. The city at night stretched across my windshield, buildings glowing quietly, each window like a small painting. No two were alike, but each had its own light. None needed to be perfect, only enough to let someone know it was a place they could stop and breathe. The next morning, I walked into the company's conference room with a thick folder in hand. On the large screen at the front, a map of the highway route glowed, red lines marking the site of the new bridge the city was preparing to build. The project director introduced me to the room. This is Vivian Collins, who will serve as lead designer and construction manager for this project. The applause rose, not too loud, but enough for me to feel the weight of the responsibility just placed on my shoulders. I bowed slightly, then began presenting the plan. Before us was a project of major scale, linking two areas long separated by a deep valley. The bridge would not only serve as infrastructure, but also as a symbol of new growth for the entire region. After the meeting, as people filtered out, a young man approached. He wore a simple button-down shirt and carried a stack of technical reports. I'm Alex, in charge of environmental assessments. We'll be working together quite a bit. I nodded, glad to collaborate. I need someone who understands the natural conditions of this area so we can avoid costly mistakes. Alex smiled. I grew up near here. I know every stream and patch of soil in that valley. Trust me, I'll show you where foundations can go and where they shouldn't. There was something in his voice that gave me confidence. Not promises, but the certainty that comes only from real experience. In the days that followed, we worked side by side almost constantly. I focused on structure while he handled ecosystems, soil, and water impacts. Many afternoons, we sat together in a small meeting room, sketching across maps, debating every detail. There are migratory fish that come through here seasonally. Alex pointed to the small river running through the valley. If we put a pier here, it'll block the current and disrupt spawning. I suggest moving it 10 yards east. I reviewed the drawings, recalculated the figures, then nodded. That works. We can adjust the beam alignment. Thanks for catching it. He gave a faint smile, steady eyes meeting mine. Without many words, we both knew we were building something meant to last, not just for people, but for the land itself. Amid long hours, we slowly began to share more about ourselves. Over a quick lunch in the cafeteria, Alex asked why I had left Portland. I didn't tell the whole story, just said I needed a fresh start. He didn't press, only nodded, as if he had heard the same answer from many who chose San Diego as a refuge. One afternoon, after surveying the site, we stood at the edge of the valley, looking down at the river sparkling in the sunlight. The wind whipped my hair loose. Alex was quiet for a long moment before saying softly, "You carry a lot. But when you talk about the work, your eyes light up. Maybe that's what keeps you steady." I turned toward him without answering, yet something inside me eased. Some truths don't need to be spoken, just recognized. As I was piecing together this new life, a thick envelope suddenly appeared on my desk. The courier made it clear: legal documents. Signature required. I tore it open. Inside were papers from an attorney acting on behalf of my parents. The statement stunned me. Request for transfer of legal ownership of the Toyota purchased by parents 10 years ago, currently being used unlawfully. I read it again and again, my pulse hammering. That car was my pride. I had paid every installment myself, on the modest salary of an intern. I still had the receipts, the contract, the registration in my name. My parents had never spent a single dollar on it. I set the papers down, taking a long breath. This wasn't about a car. It was another strike, a way of declaring that everything I had ultimately came from them, that I couldn't stand if they chose to pull the ground out from under me. That evening, I carried the envelope to Melissa's apartment. She opened the door and, seeing my face, asked, "What happened?" I set the papers on the table. She skimmed quickly, frowning. "They're really going after the car? The one thing you paid for on your own right after college?" I dropped into a chair, leaning back. Yes, and they're not doing it for the car. They're doing it to remind me they can still claim control. Melissa put a hand on my shoulder. "You've got every document proving the car is yours. They won't win this. But I know what it feels like to have arrows aimed at you. It wears you down, doesn't it?" I nodded faintly. More exhausting than a 12-hour shift on site. We sat in silence for a while. Then she said, "You walked out of that house. Don't let them rebuild invisible walls around you. Hand it all to an attorney. Don't fight them directly. Save your strength for what really deserves it." Her words echoed inside me all night. I thought of the bridge slowly taking shape on my drafting table. I thought of Alex's look when he said my eyes shone when I spoke about work. I thought of that phrase from group therapy: blood makes you related. Respect makes you family. The next morning, I contacted a local lawyer. I handed him everything: the purchase contract, the installment receipts, the registration. He reviewed carefully, then said firmly, "You have nothing to worry about. This car is legally yours. I'll send a response immediately." I left his office feeling both heavy and light. Heavy because of how my family had turned kinship into a weapon. Light because, at least in this battle, the truth stood with me. That afternoon, I returned to the company, joining Alex and the engineers to refine the foundation load calculations. Between the scratch of pencils and the click of mice, it struck me. No matter who tried to seize pieces of my life, I was still building something larger, sturdier, beyond their reach. And in that work, no one could take my role. That Friday afternoon, after coming back from a site visit, a crisp white envelope awaited me at my apartment door. The courier had signed it in my stead. Black ink curled across the front, to Miss Vivian Collins. I paused a few seconds before breaking the seal. Inside was an ivory wedding. Invitation embossed with shimmering gold. Emily and Thomas request the honor of your presence at their wedding at the Ritz-Carlton, Los Angeles. Date and time printed clearly with a seating chart attached. Emily, my cousin, once my backyard playmate, once my partner on bike rides through the neighborhood. As adults, the gap had widened. She kept in touch with my parents, while I became little more than a shadow at family gatherings. I folded the invitation and set it down. For a week, I hesitated. I could shove it into a drawer, pretend I never received it. But inside me, another thought pressed forward. I knew my parents would be there, with Brian. I could already picture them presenting me as the daughter returned, using the grand wedding as a stage for their narrative of reconciliation. I couldn't let that play out without the truth beside it. That night, I opened the wooden cabinet and pulled out a box I had been keeping for months. Inside were the pieces of evidence I had gathered quietly, copies of my student loan agreements, while Brian's overseas tuition had been wired directly by our parents. A photo of my 12th birthday with a supermarket cake, beside Brian's 7th with a clown and colorful backdrop, rent receipts I had paid in Portland, contrasted with the monthly allowances my parents sent Brian during his inspiration year in Europe. I didn't plan to unveil everything in the middle of a wedding, but if cornered, I wanted weapons ready. On the day of departure, Melissa wheeled my suitcase to the door and held my hand tight. You don't have to prove anything to them, but if you go, remember, your boundaries are still yours. Don't let anyone tear them down. I hugged her, then boarded the long-distance bus toward Los Angeles. Along the way, I watched the scenery shift. Golden hills, tall palms, the shimmer of ocean in the distance. I thought of Emily. She likely had no idea that her wedding was being set as the backdrop for my family's performance of Harmony. The Ritz-Carlton rose like a giant crystal in the heart of the city. Chandeliers glittered, the lobby so polished it mirrored every step. I checked into the guest room reserved for me. On the list I saw immediately Mr. and Mrs. Collins, Brian Collins. They had already arrived. That evening, as I went down to the lobby for a light meal, a familiar voice reached me. My father stood nearby in a dark suit, speaking with relatives. When he noticed me, he froze, then walked over. Vivian. He said my name as if he'd just recovered something lost. You came. I kept my expression calm. This is Emily's wedding. I was invited. He nodded, forcing a smile. Good. You should be here. Tomorrow there will be so many people they'll be glad to see our family reunited. I met his eyes. If you're planning to turn Emily's wedding into a stage to polish the family's image, you'll be disappointed. His brow tightened slightly, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to the group, leaving me under the bright golden lights. The next morning, the wedding began early. I wore a deep blue satin dress, sleek but modest, seams fitting neatly. In the mirror, I fastened silver earrings my mother had never seen me wear. I wanted to arrive not as the forgotten daughter, but as a woman who had built her own place. The ballroom shimmered with overwhelming beauty. White orchids lined the aisle, light reflected from the ceiling onto lace-covered tables. Violins played softly. I had just taken my seat when Brian approached, a half-smile on his face. You're here. Mom will be happy. I didn't reply. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Could you at least pretend to be friendly? Today's a chance for everyone to see you've come back. You don't want mom and dad embarrassed, do you? I looked him straight in the eye, my voice steady. They've used me to save face. Enough times. Not today. Brian drew a sharp breath, anger flickering in his eyes, but said nothing more. As the bride and groom exchanged vows, I sat quietly, watching. Emily was radiant in her pristine white gown, her face glowing with happiness. I had no reason to take that moment from her. But when my parents began making their way toward me, after the congratulations, I knew the confrontation was unavoidable. My mother spoke first, her eyes glistening. Sweetheart, everyone here wants to see this family come together again. All you need to do is smile, nod. No one has to know the private matters. We just need a beautiful picture. I sat up straight, setting my glass down. If you want a beautiful picture, start by painting what really happened. Her gaze faltered, and she quickly tried to change the subject, but I had already caught the tremor in her voice. They hadn't expected me to bring evidence. They hadn't expected me to come ready to face them. The wedding celebration went on, music and laughter filling the air. But at my table, the tension stretched thin as wire. I knew the moment was coming when my parents would push me into a happy family photo. And when it came, I was ready to tear down the curtain they had always drawn for others. The library doors closed behind me, muting the noise of the ballroom. Golden light from the chandelier spilled across heavy leather chairs and rows of old books. My father stood by the long table, pacing. My mother sat stiff-backed, her fingers laced so tightly they had gone white. Brian leaned against the window, arms crossed, feigning calm but betraying nerves on his face. My father's voice was urgent. Good. You're here. We need to talk. I pulled out a chair, sat down, spine straight, eyes steady. Say it. Time is short. Emily's about to begin the main ceremony. My mother sighed, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Vivian, the house in Portland, the bank has issued foreclosure. We can't keep up the payments. Your father and I want you to refinance it under your income. You have a good job, a strong position. The bank will approve if it's in your name. I let her words settle, not interrupting. Brian cut in, his tone edged with reproach. Don't you see? This is when you show loyalty. That house is our home. Even if you walked away, don't abandon it too. I let silence stretch, then placed a thick folder on the table, pages clipped neatly inside. Before we talk about mortgages, look at these. My father frowned. What is this? I opened the first page. A photo of Brian's 7th birthday clown, live music, a 3-tier cake, the whole yard strung with balloons. Next to it, my 12th birthday, a small supermarket cake, crooked candles, an empty table. 2 parties. Same family. Same house. My mother winced, shaking her head. Childish things, sweetheart. Why hold on to? I flipped to the next set. My college loan agreement. Over $67,000 in my name. Payments stretched for years. Beside it, wire receipts for Brian's European tuition, all covered by my parents' account. Not childish, choices you made. Brian lunged to grab the file, but I held it tight. You're petty. So what if tuition was paid differently? Everyone has their path. I met his eyes. One path paved with money, one buried in debt. That difference is not just choice. My father slammed his hand on the table. Enough. What do you want? To dig up the past? The family is in crisis. If you don't help, we lose the house. You can live comfortably in your San Diego apartment. What about us? I inhaled deeply, then reached into my bag and pulled out a small metal box. The lid creaked open. Dozens of $1 bills, folded neatly, stacked inside. I slid it toward them. Since last Christmas, I've saved 1 bill every week. Each one a reminder of the value you once placed on me. $2 in a plastic piggy bank. This is all the love you thought I deserved. Now, here, use it to save the house. The room fell into a heavy silence. My mother sat frozen, eyes fixed on the meager pile of bills. Brian forced a hollow laugh, echoing awkwardly, "You're unbelievable. Just a silly gift. How long will you hold a grudge?" I rose, scanning their faces. This isn't about one gift. It's the pattern of 35 years. And I won't carry it anymore. My father's mouth opened, but no words came. His face shifted from anger to weariness. My mother lowered her head, hands trembling. Brian turned away, lips pressed tight, staring out the window. The muffled sound of violins and laughter drifted in from the ballroom. The air in the library was the opposite thick, waiting as though even the dust hung still. I shut the box, the lid snapping closed. I didn't come here to play savior. I'm not a bank, not a doormat for this family to wipe its feet on. If you want to save anything, start with honesty. I turned toward the door, hand on the knob. Behind me, my mother's voice cracked, trembling yet different. "Vivian, please." I paused but didn't turn. Please what? Keep paying for choices that weren't mine? Or stay silent so this family keeps looking perfect? The question hung unanswered. I opened the door, stepping into the bright hallway. Violence swelled again, pulling me back into the wedding outside. Inside me, something closed with finality, sharp as that box lid snapping shut. The chill of the metal knob still lingered as I re-entered the ballroom. Violins mingled with chatter, filling the glittering space. But my mind was still in that library, with their eyes blame, pleading, silence. I had crossed a threshold I couldn't return from. When the dinner began, my parents sought me out. They sat across from me, as if determined to resume. Brian had vanished, likely outside with a drink to cool his anger. My father spoke first, voice low, controlled. "Vivian, you can't speak to us like that. The family is in trouble. You should help." I set my fork and knife down, meeting his eyes. I was clear. If you want my involvement, we all go to joint therapy. And you both apologize publicly for what you've done. Not just to me, but to the truth you've denied. My mother froze, her eyes rimmed red. "You'd have us shame ourselves before others? They'll think this family is broken." I answered evenly. "It's been broken for years. The difference is I won't cover it with tape anymore." She began to cry, not the manipulative tears I knew, but real sobs. Her hands clutched the tablecloth. I know I was wrong. I chose the easy path. I spoiled Brian because he seemed weaker. I told myself you were strong, that you'd manage. But I was wrong. I traded fairness for comfort. My father stayed silent, eyes heavy. He still wore his rigid mask, but his hand trembled on the wineglass. I looked at them both and felt no triumph, only distance, unbridgeable. "I'm not a child waiting for recognition anymore," I said firmly, then rose. "If you want a new beginning, call me after you accept the terms. For now, I'll enjoy Emily's wedding as a guest, not as a prop in your play." I walked away, leaving them staring at the empty chair. On the balcony, the air was cooler, music drifting faintly through glass doors. I gazed out at Los Angeles lights, towers glowing like cold blocks, at least honest enough not to pretend they were the Sunday. A voice behind me, "Are you okay?" I turned to see Emily in her gown, holding a glass of water. She stepped beside me, her eyes shining. "I'm fine. It's your day." Emily smiled softly, a hint of hesitation. I heard whispers. Something tense happened in the library. I didn't deny it. Yes. But it was something I needed to face. "You don't have to worry." She touched my arm gently. "I know my aunt and uncle haven't always been fair. I've seen it since we were kids. But I still hope one day you'll have what you deserve. If I can help, tell me." I looked at her sincere face, my heart softening. "Thank you. The best thing you can do is be happy. Don't repeat how they treated siblings." Her eyes glistened as she nodded, then returned inside. I stayed a while longer, letting the night air carry off what lingered. When the party ended, I returned to my hotel room. My phone buzzed with Brian's messages. I opened one. You're selfish. If you'd compromised, we wouldn't lose the house. You're destroying this family. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled the metal box from my suitcase, staring at the stacked $1 bills. They were no longer wounds, but proof I would never return to that old place. The phone buzzed again. This time it was Melissa. I answered. Her voice was tight with worry. Are you okay? I just saw photos online, you at the wedding. I sat on the bed's edge. I drew the line. They're shocked, but there's no going back now. Melissa's voice was steady. You've done the hardest part. Now the rest is holding it. I sighed softly, a faint smile on my lips. I'll manage. Not to get revenge, but to keep from losing myself. The next morning, as I prepared to leave the hotel, I ran into my parents in the lobby. My mother's eyes were swollen, my father stood silently beside her. No words were exchanged. We passed each other like strangers who happened to share the same memories. I stepped outside, the morning sun on my face, illuminating more clearly than ever the path I had chosen. I didn't know if they would ever agree to therapy, if they would ever find the courage to apologize. But I knew one thing. I was no longer the daughter waiting for a glance of recognition. My car was still in the lot, covered in dust from the long drive. I set my suitcase in the trunk and started the covered engine. The familiar sound came alive, steady and strong. I smiled, tightening my grip on the wheel. No matter what anyone said, this was the car I had bought, maintained, and kept running just like the life I was now determined to live. A year later, my small San Diego apartment was filled with the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon. I stood in the kitchen, wooden spoon in hand, watching a tray of golden pies slide out of the oven. Laughter echoed from the living room, where Melissa was making jokes with a few of my colleagues, and Alex was busy adding extra chairs around the table. Vivian, can we get another bottle of red wine? Alex called out. Bottom shelf of the fridge, I answered lightly. The scene reminded me of the family gatherings of the past, but here it felt entirely different. No comparisons, no judging looks. Just a group of people who chose to be there because we wanted to. When everyone gathered at the table, I poured the glasses. Melissa raised hers first. To Vivian, this past year, you've built everything back from scratch. And tonight's dinner proves you're not just surviving, but truly living. Applause mixed with laughter. I joined in, but inside, warmth spread through me in a way I could hardly describe. After dinner, as the others moved to the living room for games, I noticed a package by the door, shipped from Portland. I lifted it, heavy in my hands, my heart tightening. Slowly, I cut through the tape. Inside, carefully wrapped, was a wooden box I recognized instantly. I opened it, and there they were, the old dolls I had once treasured as a child, only to have them vanish one day from my room. I had asked back then, and been told casually that my mother had put them away for safekeeping. Now, after decades, they had returned to me. Tucked beneath was an envelope with papers transferring ownership of a small plot of my grandmother's land on the outskirts. It wasn't much, but what made me stop was the short note written on the page. We want you to keep what belongs to you. We're sorry for the years past. I sank onto the sofa, running my fingers across the chipped paint of the box. It felt like touching the forgotten edges of my childhood. But unlike before, I didn't feel the need to cry to prove my pain. I realized my worth had never rested on what they could give or take. It had always been in the bridges I built, in the relationships I chose to keep. Melissa came over, gently placing a hand on my shoulder. You okay? I smiled, setting the doll box aside. Yes, better than ever, actually. The evening closed with laughter filling every corner. When the guests left, only Alex and I remained on the balcony. The autumn air was crisp, the city lights stretching like stars beneath us. In the distance, the new bridge arched across the valley, its steel frame glowing under the guide lights. Alex wrapped an arm around me. That bridge looks solid, beautiful too. Resting my head on his shoulder, I gazed at the gleaming structure. It proves that anything can be built again, from the foundation up, even when no one believed it possible. We stood there in silence, letting the night wind carry away the noise. In that moment, I felt the weight of my past, the wounds, the burdens transform into bedrock for something new, strong, steady, and no longer dependent. That bridge wasn't only connecting two sides of a valley, it was the symbol of my own life, a journey I had forged myself, beam by beam, weld by weld, standing firm through every test. And I knew I would keep moving forward across it, on my own 2 feet. I had chosen not to chase recognition, but to create my own worth. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you set boundaries to protect yourself or keep silent for the sake of family? Share your thoughts in the comments because I believe every story, every perspective can give strength to someone else. And if my journey resonates with you, subscribe to the channel to hear more stories about family, life, and the choices that shape who we become. Because sometimes all it takes is one story being told for us to realize we were never alone.